Our next speaker is Kirsten Hund from the World Bank. Kirsten is senior mining specialist, and she works primarily, she focuses on developing countries that are mineral rich, and helping them to develop strategies that will help them kind of develop those resources in a sustainable way. So I'll welcome Kirsten up to the stand.
Good afternoon. And thanks to Energy and Mines for the invitation. I feel a little bit like a different species from most people in the room here. Everybody I speak to here seems to have like very specific technical skills and knowledge. And I'm a policy person, which basically means you know very little about a lot of things, including energy and mining. So just in 2 words, because I mean, the World Bank is, I don't know how familiar people here are with the World Bank, but we're a development institution, so what we do is provide lending to governments. So we do not work, although the private sector is obviously an important stakeholder for us, our main primary clients are developing countries. And in my case, mineral-rich developing countries. So, and that's really going to be, the message today is going to be about minerals and developing countries. So it very much builds upon what the previous 2 speakers says, but it's also a little bit of a sidetrack. So it might also after lunch refresh your mind a little bit. 2 things I really want to talk about is how a low-carbon future will be more mineral intensive, and how we're all going to actually need more minerals to build all the clean energy we're going to need, and the fact that many of these minerals will come from developing countries. And basically how we can all work together, and how I'm really going to need also information and ideas from you to make sure that A, our main interest, these countries benefit from the extraction of these minerals, B, we end up with a zero net positive carbon footprint, and C, there's a security of supply for everybody. So that's very big what I'll try to run through. Why a low carbon future will be more mineral intensive, what does this mean for the countries and the private sector, and why this means actually that a call for climate smart mining becomes even more relevant and more important, and what we think is a way forward. And I think the way forward is also something that's very much work in progress. We've seen it before, and I think you're all very well aware of it. I've done variations of this presentation for different audiences over the past months, I should say, and it was always received very enthusiastically by a mining audience and a lot less by a climate audience, because they tend to get a little bit upset about the fact that they'd have to consider material implications of a low-carbon future. They tend to get a bit nervous about that, although it seems pretty much common sense to think about the fact that to build your clean energy, it actually has to be built of something. So minerals will be crucial for a low-carbon future, for windmills, for hybrid cars. You say electric cars use twice as much copper, and about 19 major mineral groups sourced in over 15 countries for an average electric car. And obviously we've all talked about cobalt, we've all heard about cobalt and lithium over the past weeks. It was very much a hype. I think everybody getting very nervous about cobalt coming from DRC, linked to artisanal mining, child labor, security of supply in general. But it's not just cobalt, it's not just lithium, it's a whole lot of other minerals as well, and I'll get to that. So to go basically from what is pretty much anecdotal, and was, I should say 2 years ago, very much anecdotal evidence, to sort of a more factual base, we decided to do, and again, it was quick and dirty, but it was still research to look at what exactly the role of metals and minerals for a low-carbon future would be. We used wind, solar, and energy storage batteries as proxies to examine which minerals and metals will likely increase in demand to be able to achieve a low-carbon future and keep global average temperature from rising more than 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. There is a report. You can download it from our website, and I'd happily send it to everybody in PDF later on if you want to. So what we did is basically use the International Energy Agency's 2016 scenario. We know it's contested, but if you want to work with scenarios, this is the best we've got, and looked at what materials were required to look at the scaled-up production of these technologies, and to what degree that demand would be driven by these climate scenarios for 2 degrees, 6 degrees, and 4 degrees global warming. The technologies we looked at were wind, solar, and energy storage, and we used metal demand from key fossil fuel technologies as to provide a baseline. This is not complete. It's really not meant as a market prediction, as you like. It's really an assessment to look at trends and possibilities. We did not look at CCS, for example, and we limited this to generation technologies. So it did not look at metal demand for grid expansion, which will obviously also be a key aspect to this. And just, to show you a quick example, the change in total metal demand. So this is not, this is percentage change, right? So this is not a total increase. This is the change compared to a baseline of 6 degree scenario. And you can see this is really this is not just lithium, this is not just cobalt, this is the whole range of metals that will be needed to build a low carbon future. And this is from a Eurometaux conference last month, where they had a live cartoonist actually drafting while the session was, and I thought it was pretty, there's a few others that I'll show you, I thought they were pretty relevant for this. So just a very quick example, the change in demand for solar PV. And as I said, this is aluminum, this is copper, this is your iron as well, lead, all the base metals, nickel, silver, zinc. And there's a lot of it will actually depend also on technology choices. I think we have to be clear about that as well, and that's something the report clearly shows, that, for example, if we're going to go for onshore or offshore wind, we'll have a massive impact on the difference in how demand will change. And obviously the commitment to actually a global warming scenario. So there's both political will, what's going to happen. We just had Bonn. I think we've made some good steps forward. We're not there yet. So a lot will depend on actual implementation of the measures and the policy, the predictions that were made there. And then where are we going to go? Technologies change very fast. Energy battery storage, I think this is the one everybody's talking about right now. Again, inter-technology changes will make a big difference. Are we talking about electric cars? Then it's lithium. Are we talking about hybrid cars? We're talking about lead. Are we talking hydrogen? Platinum becomes much more important. So there's really all different kinds of components, but in any case, we do see a massive change for a wide range of metals and minerals. But where does that lead us? And I think that's sort of where we come from. So based on this message, the rise in clean technology is expected to lead to growth in demand for a wide range of metals. Where will these come from? And what opportunities and challenges do they offer to mineral-rich developing countries? And obviously developed countries like Canada, but that they have a little less need of advice from the World Bank. So what we did is a very quick and dirty assessment based on publicly available data of known reserves from the US Geological Service. We produced a series of global commodity maps tracking known production levels and reserves in the metals assumed to play a potential role, a prominent role in a low-carbon future. We know non-renewable minerals play a dominant role in nearly 70% of countries in extreme poverty. So a growing number of low-income countries focus on resource extraction, and how can we advise them on where to go and what to focus on? We did this for about 20 minerals, and I won't go into the details here. I mean, just a few key findings, and none of this will surprise you. I mean, the dominance of China in both base and rare earth metals. Their reserves really dwarf those of most others, maybe with the exception of Australia. In Asia, besides China, India is dominant in iron and steel, titanium, Indonesia, bauxite and nickel. Latin America, obviously copper, but also iron, silver, lithium. Southern Africa is, we see platinum, manganese, bauxite, chromium. And also a key conclusion is really the black hole that Africa is from many sides when you look at geological data. We do not know, and most of these countries do not know what kind of reserves they have, in particular these strategic reserves, which makes it really difficult for them to actually plan accordingly and develop strategies for this. So what can we do to help these countries make most of these opportunities and attract investments based on real information? There's a lot of information out there, but most of it sits with commercial entities that a lot of these countries do not have access to. So how do we make those data better available to everybody so that we can turn data into investment and policies? Which brings me basically to the third part, sort of the logical next step, the carbon footprint of the industry. If we're going to mine more to supply a low-carbon economy, what about the carbon footprint of the mining itself? And we've been talking about that this whole morning. Supplying clean technologies for a carbon-constrained future is going to create all kinds of new challenges for sustainable development of minerals and resources, as if we didn't have enough, right? We know mining consumes about 11% of global energy, mining and mineral processing, I should say. And basically, we cannot just increase production without taking more mitigation measures. And there's a lot happening already. And I mean, and you know all that, and I've seen, sort of talking to the industry, there's a lot of innovation happening on the mining side. I'd say particular in developing countries, in Canada, in Australia, in Chile. There's a lot being done. There's invested in new modes and in extraction practices. There's a lot of work that's being done on energy, water efficiency, the use of smart data. There's a tremendous amount of innovation, but it very much happens on a project by project and a mine by mine basis. And we see very little coordination. And it's very much industry-led so far. We see a very limited role for governments. And one of the things I'd really be interested in afterwards to hear from you is also what role do you see for governments? If you're investing as a company in clean energy, in, for example, an African country, what problems do you face? How can governments create more of an enabling environment to actually allow for larger investments and making the carbon footprint of mining lower? We've seen, for example, with some mines in South Africa that were actually producing an excess of clean energy, but there was no way they could sell it back into the grid. There was all kind of political and legal problems with that, and we see that everywhere. So what can we do to actually, and also with a lot of new mining countries, how can they leapfrog over a lot of the problems that existed before right into a clean energy approach? And how can we all work together to do that? Another one, and this is a bit of one of my pet peeves, I should say, is the impact of extractives on deforestation. It's a little bit less relevant probably for this audience, but it is. We know 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from deforestation and forest degradation and land use change. Very recent research in the Amazon showed that about 10% of deforestation in the Amazon was actually caused by mining. Not so much by the mining, by that hole in the ground, the mining concession itself, but by the induced impacts of, for example, the construction of roads, but also power grids, and all the in-migration that it causes. We've seen in Zambia with some very recent Canadian, actually, copper projects that a massive deforestation was caused also by the fact that power lines were built, thereby deforesting a large area, making the area accessible for logging and other kinds of forest use. So what can we do to actually create some kind of integrated land use and have different government departments, but also different companies work together to limit that and do mining in a much more comprehensive way, really planning both the energy, the mining, and the infrastructure development in such a way that the footprint is as low as possible, and develop policies that promote spatial planning and resource corridor developments that do take this into account. And there again, it's really a matter of everybody needing to work together. It's a complicated story, and just getting a Ministry of Mines and a Ministry of Environment to work together is a massive challenge, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So getting different companies and different government departments to all work together to come to some kind of land use plan is a massive challenge. But if we want to face the global warming challenges, I don't think we have much of a choice. This one I don't wanted to show. That was what the climate, I talked to somebody, a climate change person who was very much in favor of clean energy, and he said, like, please don't talk to me about material implications. Before we know it, activists will start yelling about blood windmills, and we'll get that problem. I thought it was an interesting one, and I don't think anyone wants to go there. But it is, I think we need to look beyond just building a power plant or just building a mine and really start to look all the way through the supply chain at the material implications of a low carbon future, what it means for the mining industry and what it means for the footprint along the way. So just to conclude with that, as I said, we will need the mining and metals industry to achieve a low carbon future. And as a mining person, it's nice, I guess, for once to be part of the solution instead of always being seen as part of the dirty industry that is such a problem. Many of these minerals, and I think a growing number of these minerals, will have to come from resource-rich developing countries, and I think it's something we should promote. Again, I was in Bonn actually last week, and somebody said, why not just try to get them from Canada and Australia to avoid all these problems with governance and low capacity and poverty? I don't think that's the solution. These countries have the resources to help us all develop a low carbon economy. I think they have the right to get it out of the ground, but they need to do so in the most responsible way with the lowest footprint. And if we want the security of supply of critical minerals, it will be crucial to make sure these minerals are extracted in a sustainable and climate resilient way. I think this is part of the business case for clean energy and mining, very much so. And I think we all need to work together. As I said, we'll need better geological data. We need to get these data to these countries. We need strong governance, environmental management. I think the Green Mining Initiative that was presented this morning is something that every single country, every single developing country needs as well. These countries need the capacity and knowledge to plan over the long term. I mean, the market predictions and the scenarios that were sketched this morning, I don't think anyone, I mean, I do a lot of work in Niger. I'm very sure the Ministry of Mines of Niger has never seen of these predictions and is not really planning its strategy for its geological research or its investment strategy along those lines. So how do we get that information out there? Because I think that will be in the interest of everybody here. We need landscape level planning, and the last part is the climate resilience and adaptation, where these countries also really will need help with to make sure the mining industry is actually sustainable over the long term. Thank you very much.